The death toll from Tuesday's earthquake in Kumamoto, Japan, has climbed to 28, with 9 additional deaths still under investigation as possibly related to the disaster, meaning the confirmed toll could ultimately reach closer to 37. Rescuers are now racing against the critical 72-hour mark, the window after which survival chances for anyone still trapped drop sharply. And scientists remain genuinely alarmed for a second, separate reason. This earthquake struck the exact fault system that, less than a decade ago, produced one of the most studied earthquake sequences in modern seismology, one where the first major quake wasn't actually the big one. So today I want to walk you through where this disaster stands right now, why the science behind Japan's continued warnings is so much more concrete than routine caution, and what's actually happening in the race to find survivors. Make sure you're subscribed before we get into it, because this situation is still very much unfolding. Let's start with the human toll, because it's grown substantially just in the past day. As of Thursday, July the 30th, Kumamoto's prefectural government confirmed 28 deaths tied to the earthquake, with 9 more deaths still being investigated to determine whether they are disaster-related. A distinction Japanese authorities draw carefully, since some deaths in the disaster's aftermath involve underlying health conditions or indirect causes that require formal review before being added to the official count. At least 62 people have been injured, 6 of them seriously, according to the prefectural government. The earthquake also claimed its first confirmed foreign national victim, a Vietnamese resident, according to NPR's reporting from the region. The most devastating single site remains the Aeon Mall shopping center in the town of Kashima. The mall was bustling with an estimated 3,000 customers when the earthquake struck in the late afternoon, and the company said most of those customers were evacuated to a parking lot before an explosion occurred in another part of the mall where some employees were still working. The mall's second floor collapsed, trapping people inside. As of early Thursday, 6 people have been confirmed dead at the mall site, among 11 people who have been pulled from the wreckage so far. A second major disaster site has emerged since my last update. In nearby Yatsushiro, a chimney collapsed at a Nippon Paper Industries factory, killing 5 people, with 7 others rescued from the debris. As of the most recent reporting, 4 people were still believed to be trapped there. That factory chimney collapse represents a genuinely separate mass casualty site from the mall, and it's a reminder that this disaster's toll isn't concentrated in a single location. It's spread across multiple sites across the region, each requiring its own dedicated rescue operation. Here's a detail that's become central to how this rescue operation is being described in the last day of coverage. Rescuers are racing against the clock to find survivors before the crucial 72-hour mark passes. That 72-hour window is a widely recognized benchmark in disaster response and search and rescue science, and it's worth understanding why that specific number carries so much weight. After a person is trapped in rubble, their chances of survival without water in whatever weather conditions exist at the surface begin dropping steeply once that roughly 3-day window passes. Dehydration, crush injuries, and, in this case, genuinely oppressive summer heat all compound the danger the longer someone remains trapped. That's exactly why officials and rescue teams treat the 72-hour mark as a meaningful, if not absolute, turning point in a disaster response, and why the language around this operation has shifted toward increasing urgency, as Thursday's coverage described hope dwindling even as search efforts continue. The heat itself has become its own compounding factor in this disaster, separate from the earthquake and its direct structural damage. NPR's reporting from Kumamoto specifically noted that sweltering weather has heightened worries for survivors, with rescuers themselves having to brave the heat while working through collapsed structures. That combination, a disaster striking in the middle of peak Japanese summer heat, with rescue crews working long hours in direct exposure while searching for anyone still alive in the rubble, adds a genuine layer of risk on top of the earthquake's direct damage, both for potential survivors and for the rescue workers themselves. For context on how this all started, the magnitude 7. One earthquake struck Kumamoto Prefecture on Kyushu Island at 4:30 p.m. local time on Tuesday, July 28th, with the U.S. Geological Survey's independent estimate coming in somewhat lower, around magnitude 6. 8. The quake registered a shindo of 7, the maximum possible reading on Japan's seismic intensity scale, in the hardest hit areas. A tsunami advisory was issued immediately afterward, and lifted a short time later once the wave threat, estimated at around 1 meter, had passed without escalating. The earthquake sparked fires in Kumamoto City, the prefectural capital, cut power to thousands of homes, and left roads badly damaged on top of the mall collapse and the factory chimney collapse in Yatsushiro. Just after midnight on Wednesday, a magnitude 4. One aftershock struck the region, one of what officials have described as multiple strong aftershocks continuing to hit the area since the initial quake. This is where the story connects to something with real, specific scientific weight behind it, separate from the tragedy of the rising death toll itself. Authorities have urged residents to remain vigilant for continued large quakes, and that warning is grounded in exactly which fault system this earthquake struck. Kumamoto Prefecture sits at the southern end of the Japan median tectonic line, at a point where the fault system splits into two branches. This week's earthquake ruptured the Hinagu Fault and the neighboring Futagawa Fault, the same fault system responsible for the 2016 Kumamoto earthquake sequence, one of the most closely studied earthquake sequences in modern seismology, precisely because of what happened after the first major quake struck. In April 2016, at 21:26 local time on April 14th, an earthquake with a magnitude of 6.5 struck the Kumamoto area, causing a seismic intensity of 7 in the town of Mashiki and killing 9 people. At the time, this was treated as the primary event. Then, just 28 hours later, at 1:25 a.m. on April 16th, a significantly larger earthquake, magnitude 7. 3, according to the Japan Meteorological Agency's own official report, struck the same region with seismic intensity 7 recorded in both Mashiki and the village of Nishihara. The JMA's own report on the sequence states plainly, this was the first time the agency had ever recorded 2 earthquakes with a seismic intensity of 7 within 2 days of each other. That second quake killed at least 26 more people on its own, triggered a small eruption at nearby Mount Aso, and set off landslides that blocked roads and buried victims in the mountain village of Minamiaso. A dam collapsed near Nishihara village, forcing an evacuation. In one coastal town, the city hall itself was so badly damaged that officials feared it could collapse entirely, and a hospital had to be evacuated because it was no longer considered safe. By the time the full toll was tallied, at least 48 people had died in the combined sequence, including 11 deaths attributed to illness brought on by the physical stress of prolonged evacuation. People sleeping in cramped shelters or their own cars for extended periods, in some cases, developing deep vein thrombosis. More than 100,000 people were displaced, and major manufacturers, including Toyota, were forced to suspend production in the region entirely. Here's the detail that matters most for understanding why officials are being so careful with their language this week. Seismologists only reclassified that initial 2016 magnitude 6.5 earthquake as a foreshock after the larger magnitude. Setsu, 3 quake, struck 28 hours later. Before that second earthquake happened, there was no scientific way to know the first one wasn't already the primary event. The entire concept of a foreshock is inherently retroactive, identifiable only after something larger follows it. Research conducted after the 2016 sequence, using a technique called Coulomb stress transfer modeling, found that the initial quake appears to have physically transferred stress onto the neighboring Futagawa fault segment, effectively loading it toward its own failure point and helping trigger the larger main shock that followed. Post-event analysis found the geometry of the Hinagu and Futagawa faults was arranged in almost exactly the configuration that would maximize that kind of stress loading effect between the two segments, meaning the 2016 sequence wasn't simply an unlucky coincidence of 2 nearby earthquakes, but a case where the first rupture appears to have mechanically primed the second. That history is exactly why this week's warnings from Japanese authorities carry real scientific weight, rather than reflecting generic post-earthquake caution. This week's magnitude, one event struck the identical fault system that, less than a decade ago, demonstrated it was capable of exactly this kind of sequence. Japanese seismologists are almost certainly running the same category of stress transfer analysis right now, trying to determine whether this week's rupture has similarly loaded any still intact neighboring segment. It's worth understanding why scientists can identify this risk in general terms, while still being unable to say whether a large earthquake will actually follow. Researchers who studied the 2016 sequence specifically investigated whether any measurable warning sign had existed beforehand, examining something called the B value, a statistical measure comparing the ratio of smaller to larger earthquakes in a given region. Studies found a zone of unusually low B values near the eventual epicenters of both the 2016 foreshock and main shock, but researchers couldn't determine exactly when that pattern began, since it appeared roughly constant across the 16 years of data available before the sequence started. Even detailed retrospective analysis couldn't isolate a clear, actionable warning sign right before the larger 2016 quake. Whatever signal existed, if any, was buried in a long-term statistical pattern rather than a real-time signal scientists could have flagged in the moment. That's exactly why Japanese officials' messaging this week follows the same fundamental structure it did in 2016, communicating that the probability of continued strong aftershocks, or in the less likely but historically demonstrated worst case, a genuinely larger subsequent earthquake, is elevated compared to normal background rates without being able to specify exactly when, whether, or how large any such event might be. This vulnerability extends back further still. An 1889 earthquake, magnitude 6. 3 struck the western part of Kumamoto Prefecture on July 28th, coincidentally the same calendar date as this week's earthquake, 137 years apart, killing 20 people, 5 in Kumamoto City and 15 in the Akita district. Researchers who studied the 2016 sequence noted its damage and death toll were far greater than that 1889 event, reflecting both the larger magnitude of the 2016 main shock and the substantially denser modern development now built atop the same fault system. That same fault system has now produced a third major disaster within this same broader historical window, striking a region that keeps growing more populated with each passing decade. Search and rescue work inside partially collapsed structures like the Kashima Mall and the Yatsushiro factory is genuinely difficult. Technical work, compounded this week by extreme heat. Crews have to assess which sections of a damaged structure can safely bear weight before sending in personnel, often relying on structural engineers working alongside rescue teams to identify safe entry points. That combination of urgency, structural caution, and now heat exposure is exactly why officials have continued to describe both sites as ongoing operations, even as the 72-hour window narrows, and why the confirmed death toll has continued climbing as crews make incremental, careful progress through the wreckage at multiple sites simultaneously. One resident's account gives a sense of what the initial moment felt like on the ground. Kiyoshi Matsunaga, 74, who lives near the mall, was at a nearby supermarket pushing his cart toward a cash register when the shaking began. Things scattered from the shelves around him. He said he thought he was going to die and could not move until the shaking stopped. If you're anywhere in Kumamoto Prefecture or the broader Kyushu region right now, continue treating the possibility of further strong shaking as a real elevated risk, exactly as authorities have urged. Avoid any buildings showing visible damage, even ones that otherwise look structurally sound. Stay clear of coastal areas and steep slopes given standing landslide warnings, and rely directly on NHK and Japan Meteorological Agency alerts for the most current information. Given the extreme heat compounding this disaster, anyone involved in cleanup or rescue support, or simply spending extended time outdoors or in a home without reliable power, should treat heat exposure as a genuine compounding risk on top of the seismic danger, a combination that has proven fatal in this exact region before, during the prolonged 2016 evacuation period. If you're trying to reach family or friends in the affected region, keep in mind that phone networks frequently become overloaded after a disaster of this scale. Japanese carriers typically activate a disaster message board service during events like this one, letting people in the affected area register a status update that others can check remotely. I'll be tracking this closely over the coming days, whether the death toll continues climbing as the 9 deaths currently under investigation are formally confirmed, whether rescuers are able to reach anyone still alive at the mall or the Yatsushiro factory site before or after the 72-hour mark passes, and whether the aftershock sequence continues the more typical pattern of gradual decline or shows any signs echoing the 2016 escalation. I want to be direct that nothing currently confirms a larger earthquake will follow. Most major earthquakes, including this one so far, follow the standard pattern of gradually diminishing aftershocks. What makes the situation worth sustained, genuine attention is that this specific fault system has already demonstrated within recent memory that it's capable of the rarer, more dangerous alternative, and that the human toll from this week's event alone, now approaching 30 confirmed dead, with dozens more injured and several still trapped across multiple sites, already represents a serious, ongoing tragedy, regardless of whatever comes next. As it says in Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. For everyone in Kumamoto right now, the families of those already lost, the people still waiting for word on loved ones trapped at the mall or the factory, and the rescue workers pushing through both physical danger and extreme heat as the clock runs down, that's worth holding on to. Keep them in your thoughts, and I'll bring you the next update as soon as there's real, meaningful news to share. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.